Some CN rail workers in Prince George getting honks in support of their strike action today. 110 people are striking in that city, and there are more than 3,000 across the country. Management and the union failed to reach a deal, but talks continue while trains sit idle. Workers say they're concerned about working hours and dangerous conditions. Management says they're responding to an economic slowdown. Greg Gormick is a transportation analyst and a policy advisor. We've reached him in Oshawa, Ontario. Hello there.
Hi, Sarah.
So we mentioned a little bit in the intro, but can you tell me a bit more about the issues dividing the two sides here?
Well, from management, we're getting the usual hot air that you can tap your foot in time with. Things are tough, traffic's down, we've got to cut, tighten our belts. Yeah, well, for the last few months I've been helping a group of citizens in Milton, just west of where I live on the east side of the so-called Greater Toronto and Hamilton area. And their big thing has been that CN just has to build this monster yard to destroy their community because their traffic is up. So perhaps CN management and their flax down there at 935 de la Gauchetière in Montreal could get their acts together here, right? From labor's point of view, they're saying you're constantly tightening our belt, and you're now doing it not just with things like prescription benefits. Now you want to drive a wedge between the yard and the road employees. You want to make us work more erratic hours. And so labor, quite rightly, has said, no, that's as far as we're going. And they didn't want to go through this process where they knew they would get the shaft from management, so they've called a strike. I'm with them. I support this. It's long overdue.
So in terms, we obviously know the workers are directly impacted, but in terms of Canadians overall, like in their lives in general, how will Canadians' lives be affected by this?
Well, if you give it enough time, it'll affect everybody because there's hardly anything that moves in bulk in Canada that doesn't move on the rails at some point. It will start, as you're seeing out there, people along the main line to Prince Rupert and down the Yellowhead, down the canyon. They're seeing it with the grain traffic. So it works its way back from the port workers, from the international grain markets, all the way back through the railroaders, the people who are dependent upon them, the supply industry, grain handling, the farmers. That's where it hits first. But then we've got things like on the route to Prince Rupert. It'll affect the movement of lumber, which goes into new housing. It'll affect the movement of the containers coming and going through the ports of Vancouver and Prince Rupert. It will ripple its way back through every sector of the rail freight portfolio, which is every sector of the Canadian economy. It just takes time.
Now, Transport Canada sent a memo last year and it warned of the safety risks posed by exhausted crew members on trains. We've heard employees talk about it as well. How were these concerns addressed by the company, or were they?
Nah, they weren't properly, and that was awfully big of Transport Canada, astronaut Garneau's ministry, which has the power to go in and demand resolution and to work with them to bring about resolution. There's the problem. They throw these things over to management, and management then dumps it on labor. Nothing gets resolved. The conditions get worse, and government just goes la-di-da, not our problem, arm's length. Well, I'm sorry. That's not the way it works. It's not the way it works in other countries, even in the United States. The government needs to get involved in this, and that's what's going to happen next. But it's going to be just papering over the damage until the next crisis.
You mentioned what happens next. How do you see this unfolding?
Oh, I'm sure Patty Hyde and her colleagues right now are getting the legislation together so that they can order the workers back, and they'll think that's just fine. There'll be the cooling off period, negotiations, arbitration, and they think that'll be the end of it, but it won't be because there are more rail labor contracts expiring, and this will go on and on. We've already had these situations, and every time it happens, it affects our economy. It affects our reputation, too, because investors go, gee, do I really want to invest in a country where the rail service gets disrupted all the time? So this is not going to be a solution. It could be, and what we really need something we haven't had for decades. We need a royal commission on national transportation that can analyze this using the services of the best experts in all the different modes from around the world. And if the government doesn't have the guts to do that, then hand it over to the standing committee at the Senate. on transportation and infrastructure and let them do it. But this cannot continue because Canada is becoming dysfunctional because its transportation system is increasingly dysfunctional.
Greg, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks so much for the conversation.
My pleasure.
Okay.
Thanks, Sarah.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
You betcha. Bye.
Bye.
That's Greg Gormick. He's a transportation analyst and a policy advisor. Our Daybreak listeners in Prince George will be able to hear more tomorrow morning about fatigue and other safety concerns.